Our next piece of furniture is this very nice leather recliner, and the customer has sent us some pictures to evaluate. We can see that the back panel is made of vinyl and it's got a very large hole. Now the customer is insisting that we do a spot repair. What do you think? What would you suggest to the customer? Take a minute to think about that. And then I'm going to ask you to get out of your recliner and, you know the drill, let's get to work. You may find if you work in a particularly humid climate that your needles will get some surface rust. So, from time to time, you may want to take some steel wool and just get the surface rust off of there. Now, if there's some pitting, you won't be able to remove the pitting, but that's okay. It's only the surface rust that offers resistance while you're sewing. The pitting really won't matter at all. Then, if you're looking for a little extra cleanup, you can mix some baking soda and peroxide together to make a paste. Let that sit for a while, or maybe even overnight if you want to. Rinse it off, and now you're ready to get back to work. Our recliner is very good quality leather, and on the back side where the vinyl is, that is some pretty large damage right there. And there are some other spots here too. What do you think? I was able to convince the customer that a replacement panel was the better option. I'm thinking that I want to save this bottom flap. There's nothing wrong with it. And the customer has stated that he's not concerned about this contrasting stitching, this white stitching. Although here on the top, we don't have to touch the white stitching. Here down the sides, we can omit it. And then it'll resume here on this bottom flap. Now the nice thing about saving this bottom flap is that it has Velcro that attaches to the bottom rail. So if we could leave this panel intact as it is, we wouldn't have to mess with the Velcro. So to make a replacement panel, it's necessary that we get the exact measurement from seam to seam, because we want our replacement panel to have the same tension as this one. The bottom length is 3/8 shorter, so we'll have to taper. Also attached to our vinyl is this what looks like spandex material. I'm not keen on separating the spandex, so why not leave that attached to the flap, and then we'll just cut our section of vinyl a little short of that seam. We are fortunate that the back of this recliner pulls off from the seat bottom, and so it's easily transported. We can pull that right here into the office as well. In the 3 examples in our series, transportation has not been a problem. But as we know, moving furniture can be a major expense. So we're quite fortunate this time to have just been able to hand carry these pieces. Remember that waxed leather we refinished? We had to bring that couch into the office for a couple of weeks before we could make a delivery. That was more work than I wanted to do. Fortunately, we also have a massage chair in the office. Remember here, We're cutting above the seam so we don't separate that spandex material from the bottom flap. Every job has its own idiosyncrasies. So we'll transfer our dimensions to our new piece and we will be ready to go. For each side, I've decided to start in the middle with my double needle blind stitch. No pre-punched holes this time, just vinyl to vinyl. We won't spend much time on the stitching, we're just going to show some of the key points. As you can see on our new piece, we have a yellow grease pencil line, which is the exact location of the seam, and then we have a seam allowance for that. On the other panel, we can use the pre-existing holes from the prior stitch. And if you want to, you can use a clamp to hold down the material on the other end. And this is what it looks like getting the job started. As we get near the end, we see one spot on that top panel that we will have to touch up later. Now for the second half. We can start at the middle and work toward the other end because the double needle blind stitch can be started and stopped at any point. We can tie it off, we can start again, anywhere along the panel. For example, if you didn't figure in enough thread, tie off what you have and just get some new thread and start right from there. As we reach the other end and we don't know exactly where the last stitch has to fall, we can drop our needles off the thread, stitch the other side first, then put the needles back on this thread and do our last stitch as we see fit. Again here, we don't want to show a lot of stitching, just the fact that we are starting at the center point on our bottom stitch line. This is where we attach to that flap, and we're concerned about getting the right tension in our piece, especially because we know that that spandex type fabric underneath also has to be tight when this is pulled together. So that's the critical point here. Of course, we're following our yellow stitch line, and the other side follows the original stitch line. So far we can see that our vinyl is in good tension. And now we can see we've accomplished what we needed to with the spandex type fabric as well. Looking pretty good. And now going in the other direction, remembering again that we can stop and start our double needle blind stitch at any point in our seam line. Now we'll just take a quick peek at the third leg of our journey. And the tension in our piece is looking really good pulling from this direction as well. So we're going to do a little tuck-tuck fold here on the corner. And all is looking pretty good, up until we get to the other end. Now I thought that I had measured seam to seam precisely, and I thought I centered this panel precisely, but the evidence says otherwise. I'm a little bit long on my mark. So I need to make an adjustment here. And so right at the edge of the frame here, I'm making another more accurate stitch line. And now let's do another corner. I decided to check the other end good before we got started, and it's looking okay for some reason. The very first stitches on this line were a little too tight. Can you see the puckering in between each stitch? And so therefore, traveling further, I went on the outside of the line, where then you have less tension. I'll do the same in the other direction, staying on the outside of the line. If you want to use a solvent to remove the grease pencil, but you don't want to lighten or ashen the look of the black vinyl, you can use WD-40 because it also contains a lubricant. We're not going to get too carried away with this small blemish here. Let's just put an air dry filler in there to give it a skin, and then we'll dab some color on that and we'll call it square. In the big scheme of things, no one will be the wiser. That will put the finishing touches on our third segment, our third example. What consensus have we come to for our two dilemmas? That the public can't find anyone to fix their furniture, and that the techs cannot make money fixing furniture. Let's review what we've found. I do know the industry quite well, and I don't necessarily expect folks to be adopting, inserting furniture panels by hand. But have we at least given you a new perspective, a fresh perspective on the subject? I hope so. Now, pertaining to our first problem of not being able to find anyone to do the repairs, I think a lot of this lies in the fact that shops do not want to allocate the space for completely tearing down a piece of furniture. And that is a big job in itself. Tearing it down, getting the material, putting it all back together, that's a big job that many are not willing to embark upon. But have they ever had this perspective of hand sewing an insert? Probably not. So here's another consideration, maybe one step further toward that being available for the customers. The second item on profitability on the part of the repair techs comes up. But what do we know now? Having done a repair or two, what do we know? Well, we know the cost of the materials and shipping, right? So we have a good idea how many yards of material we're going to order and what that will cost us. We also have an idea how much stitching can we do in a certain amount of time. What is one session of stitching for us? Is it a half hour? Is it 45 minutes? We also are better able to estimate the number of sessions that it will take then for the entire job and how much time, right, for the whole job. and think about profitability. Let's use the figure $1 per stitch just for the sake of argument. So when we measure the job, if we have a perimeter of 80 inches, and if we're doing a stitch that's a 1/4 inch, that is 4 stitches per inch, then we have 320 stitches. So if we were to figure that arbitrary figure of $1 per stitch, there's $320. So that gives us a view of how to bid the job that we may not have had before. We didn't know how to bid. Now, in the case that we do stitches by hand, freehand that is, without measuring, and we estimated at 3/8 of an inch, just like in this last episode here, part 3. So we could roughly figure multiplying by 3, right? 3 stitches per inch, roughly. Right? So then we take 8 times 3. There's $240 at $1 per stitch. Okay. By the way, if we ever advertised a job that involved $1 per stitch, we'd have half the world at our doorstep, wouldn't we? So then the next item is that perhaps we would be dismissive of doing this kind of work because we're too busy. And that's totally understandable because shops are busy today. There are fewer and fewer people getting involved in upholstery, so the upholstery shops are already loaded up, right? They're already burdened down trying to get out all this work. So they don't want to take on something that's going to involve more time and less profit. But have we given you a new perspective there too? Instead of looking at this job as being one humongous chunk of time, we're showing that we're only going to stitch for a certain duration of time each day. One session. How much can we do in one session? And so when we bid the job, the customer has to know that this is not the kind of thing that we do in one day. We have a session today, a session tomorrow, we might take a break, a session the next day. So it could be 4 or 5 sessions before the job is completed. Can we work that in? Can we do a session during our morning coffee or something? It's up to each individual, but at least we look at it from a different perspective probably than before. So that's a good thing about our videos, is to get us looking differently at a subject. Now, let the customer know that Mount Everest isn't climbed in a day, right? So you spend the first day just getting to base camp. Then there's camp 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the next day is reaching the summit. So it's all in installments that we do this. The customer has to be happy that we're taking a week or 2 or whatever it takes to get this job done in installments. Sessions, 1 session per day. The fourth item that we've learned, or that we're going to address, I should say, is that some may feel insecure about stitching. Well, here's a quote. This is from an actress, Helen Hayes, and this is somebody's take on her quote. "Every confident master was once a hesitant beginner." Right? So we all have to start somewhere. Start small. So climbing any mountain, right, any obstacle requires preparation. First, we have to get out of our own backyard, right, and climb smaller mountains first. Real mountain climbers prepare for years before they take on a big peak. And so we can think of it in the same way. Develop our skills, develop our double needle blind stitch skills, right, by small jobs every day, and get really confident where that comes almost second nature to us. The preparation for climbing involves physical fitness, and so that's what our day-to-day stitching opportunities give us. They prepare us physically for these big jobs that are mountainous obstacles for us. So if we have climbed one mountain, if we've done one of these repairs, what does that mean? Well, that means that when the next obstacle or mountain presents itself, we will look at it different than everyone else. So from this mountain, the next mountain doesn't look that much taller. We have faith that we can do it because we've already scaled this peak. Whereas to everyone else that's down there at sea level, let's say, that mountain is insurmountable, right? They're going to dismiss that. But instead of us dismissing that next obstacle, we're going to look at it as an opportunity. And that's going to make the difference. Really, there's an element of entertainment for me. I know I'm not the average guy, but I enjoy these challenges as somewhat entertaining. And so the customer actually ends up paying me for my entertainment. And you might wonder why a 68-year-old guy looks forward to going to work every day. Is because there's something new every day. There's something exciting, there's something fun, and actually entertaining about the work that I do. And about money. We learn on the job by tackling things that we may thought we never could do before. It's on-the-job training, and it's an education that the customer has also paid us for. And at the end of that education that we couldn't get anywhere else, we have zero student debt. Isn't that interesting? Bear in mind, too, there was this famous music group, they're still active, most of them, Alabama. Back in the day, when Alabama started out playing music, they started in a club in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, playing for tips. Imagine that. So they honed their craft while playing for tips. And I think for most of the 80s, they were at the top of the mountain, right? They had one number one hit after another. So you may find that as you develop new techniques, you are the only one there in your area on the summit. You look around, you're the only one. So when the next opportunity presents itself, you are in a position to take advantage of that next opportunity. And since you're the only one qualified, you stand in a better position to name your price at that point. All the way up to that point, maybe you felt like you were working for tips, but it will pay off one day. And we don't know what tomorrow will bring, if anything, really. But along the way, at least we've developed a skill, we've developed self-confidence, we have a sense of accomplishment, and all these really make for a good work environment for us. We've created our own entertaining work environment, you could say. So anyway, thank you for bearing with us on these 3 parts of inserting a panel by hand. I hope it has given you a fresh new perspective and perhaps a better business opportunity in the future.